Oh, we might as well get started. So, welcome to Startup Face Off. This is our first one. So, we're going to be a little rusty here, and no one knows what's going to happen. But we're going to start off with introduction. So, Mitt, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, awesome. I do a number of things. I'm CFO for a self-driving startup and have worked with a number of other tech companies as well in the past. I come from more of a traditional finance and business background. I'm a CPA by trade. Worked at Dream Unlimited as an asset management and accounting and finance, and then had started my own accounting practice with my business partner Pierre Sands, CPA, where we work with a number of small tech startups, but also regular traditional businesses. So it's interesting, and I think it'll go into some of the topics that we talk about today as well. Is everyone thinks, oh, startups are different. I can only draw upon lessons from startups, but there's a lot of other areas of business that have already been validated by traditional businesses, and and our role or my role has typically been trying to be an advisor to most of these organizations and bringing the best practices from both private and publicly traded companies to these organizations, along with helping them with their accounting and finance functions. And I'm now doing more active roles with some of the tech companies that we work with there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mitt. Marcus?
Hey, so yeah, I'm Marcus. I guess I run a company called How To Project. We specialize in remote project management and operations. We also have a strong background, 22 years in digital marketing. So our primary purpose is to really just help facilitate companies of a medium to large size to increase profitability by reducing their internal project management office capacity. At the same time, we do work with a lot of stage 2 businesses. What we mean by that, it's actually a phrase you come up with for us years ago. We don't deal with the stage 1s. We actually don't deal with the startups directly. That's why we're involved with things like this, because we love to support them. And the best way we do that is by smashing all the illusions that most entrepreneurs seem to have about the entrepreneurial dream. Hence why I asked to be called the anti-motivational speaker for this, because a lot of people walk away going, damn, I hate that guy, but he's right. So we'll have to see how that goes tonight.
And Will.
Hi, yeah, I'm Will Greenblatt. I run Out Loud Speaker School, which is an agency of actors who teach public speaking, pitch coaching, communication, and content creation, which we're getting a lot more into now. So basically, we run a program called the Powerful Pitch Program. So we help founders and teams tell powerful stories. And then we also work with some corporate clients like Wayfair and Google and stuff, and help their analysts tell stories with data and how to, bring data findings to life and basically any presentations, but we really focus on pitching. And my dog is just chiming in there. And we, and so that's the heart of what we do is help pitching and especially storytelling, and then how to spread that throughout your organization.
All right, so I'm going to kick us off. I was in on a panel a couple years ago. I can't remember what the panel was called, and somebody stood up and asked the panel, why doesn't the startup ecosystem in Toronto recognize failure like Silicon Valley? And the panel went around, and they went to me first, and I said, no, I want to go last on this one. And I said, my response, they all did their thing, was, if you fail, it's your fault. Why should you be proud of that? You failed. You took somebody's money. You promised people jobs and career, and now that's all gone. Why are you proud of that? So my question is failure a badge of honor or shameful? What do you say?
Don't all jump in at once, right?
Yeah, I was going to throw it over to you, Marcus, because I know you always have something to say.
Yeah, but it's sometimes fun to be the last guy to go, as you know. So it's really interesting. I was having a discussion of all things about Star Wars recently, and I think that's how I'm going to answer the question. They're talking about the light side of the Force versus the dark side of the Force and the different powers associated with it. So for example, if I say Force healing, we naturally think, oh, Jedi, light side of the Force. I say Force lightning, we think, obviously, Sith, it's an evil power. Yet Darth Vader himself spent a lot of time using the Force to attempt to heal his wounds. That's fascinating. So there's a lesser known theory called the potentium. And what the potentium does is it basically states two things. One, that there's inherently no light side or dark side. There is only your intention. And two, the idea is growth in the force. So to answer your question in business terms, I'm the same way. Failure itself is really about your own mindset. If it's a mindset where failure does become the dark side of the force and beats you down and makes you feel like you just cannot continue, then that's probably not a good thing. But at the same time, if you buy into the platitudes of failure is just learning experiences and failures are how we get to success, that can be equally dangerous. So what I like is that middle line where failure is an opportunity for growth if you actually know how to learn from it. And something Will said earlier made me already fall in love with him a little bit more. And he was talking about storytelling from data. And we know I'm a huge data guy. And it's something I preach again and again to entrepreneurs. It'll come up tonight, I'm sure, is that if you don't have your data, you have no story to tell. So it's the same thing. The reason most entrepreneurs are doomed to or any business, not even entrepreneurs, but the reason they're doomed to repeat the same failures is because they weren't measuring what went wrong in the first place. So that's how I'm going to answer that question tonight. Can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. What do you think, Mitt?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd echo what Mark has said, right? It all comes down to how you reflect upon the situation. I think entrepreneurs more or less also need to understand that the VCs or angels who invested them, what they were making wasn't a guaranteed investment. They weren't buying a GIC. They weren't buying a bond. There's a risk to it. That's why they expect only a handful of them to actually succeed. So don't look at you failing as, oh, I failed. It's sort of, why didn't it work? And I think where Marcus is going to come with some of his topics is look back as to what happened. Break down the situation of what you did wrong. And now, can you learn from it? Can you actually pivot, etc.? That's like, I guess, one of my topics is when do you sort of decide, like, am I making the right decision? Do I consult others? What do I do? And the reason why Toronto, and I would say Canada in itself, doesn't really celebrate failure or success, failure, and mainly focus on success is because in comparison to the US and the rest of the startup ecosystem, we only have a handful of real big successes on like the world stage. And so they don't really like showcasing a lot of the failures. And unfortunately, even when I'm sure anyone else who's watching this who's tried to raise money within Canada and hasn't previously had a business, it's super hard to get any money from anyone because they're sort of like, I don't know you. It doesn't really make sense. I need something more safe and conservative. So as a result, highlighting something like failure is totally against their ethos of who they are and what kind of people they focus on. But there are actually a handful of investors within Canada themselves who will recognize, hey, that's cool. I backed Marcus. Marcus, came to a conclusion that, this doesn't make sense for us to move forward anymore. But he was able to look at the data and determine these were the things. And now he's going to make a shift in focus and, pursue another opportunity later. And because he's been able to learn from those items, he can go forward and succeed. And that's why the Valley really celebrates it, because they want you to fail quicker and go on to the next initiative where you'll actually be successful at.
What do you think, Will?
Yeah, I mean, I think these guys said it a lot from certainly the mindset of learning from the data, really understanding what went wrong and knowing it, not just in a vague term, but with some numbers and having a learning experience needs to come from knowing how to properly contextualize what happened from the numbers. But I also, I think a lot about anxiety and how anxiety kills performance. So there's a couple things going on based off what Mitt and Marcus said, which is the expectations of other people's money and other people's expectations upon you going, I need to make this work. If I fail, the world is ending. That actually has been shown by science to not actually aid performance. A lot of people think that pressure is good because we hear these success stories of like Kobe and Steve Jobs and these people who thrived under pressure, but we don't realize that they're the minority. And pressure actually doesn't really help most people. So thinking about your startup as, oh my God, these people have given me their money. I told my parents that I'm doing this. My spouse is expecting me to achieve something. That actually doesn't really help your performance. So thinking about a failure as, this gives me more to prove, people have given me my money, all those sorts of things, doesn't do much for you. So if you can flip the mindset a little bit and just kind of lower the stakes, as Mitt said, the VCs know what they're getting into, angels know what they're getting into. And then the other thing is how vulnerable you can be when you're telling your own story as a founder, right? Standing up there and going, I did this and it didn't work, but that's okay. And so I would encourage founders to be, I guess I would say rationally vulnerable and open about their past failures. If the answer was, I got drunk too many nights and, couldn't do my work the next day because I was always hungover, maybe that's not great to share with people when you're going around telling your story. But I think the point is just owning your failures, owning your vulnerability, being vulnerable about your flaws and stuff. It's all better for not only your own sense of performance and how you are able to go through the world and get stuff done, but also just you build credibility if you can have a bit of vulnerability. If you can be open about your failures, people look at you as actually more credible rather than less. So I would encourage people to kind of own that.
Well, now, sorry, I'm going to interrupt there, but it's also equally important. I agree with you, but where it goes back as well to the same thing we're all saying is there has to be an understanding of owning success as well. Ownership is one of the core values we teach. And it's the funniest thing because on the weekly status calls we do where we celebrate something or we ask how your numbers, remember we keep talking about data, how are your numbers, up or down? And if they're down, people are like, oh, they're down and here's my excuse why, and, et cetera, et cetera. But interestingly enough, when their numbers are up, they're like, my numbers are up, but they could be better, or my numbers are up, but I know that, they need to be even more. And it's like, stop, like own the success, fully embrace that they're up. Plain and simple. Now later we'll dissect it and see how we can improve it, but give yourself that moment. Ownership's not always about the failures, and I think it's important to recognize that. Just, I know you know that, Will, but just for people listening, it's important to have that celebration ownership as well.
Yeah, and just to end this one, I think startup failure is neither a badge of honor or shameful. I think if you wear it a badge of honor, that's a problem. And if you hide it, that also is a problem. It's something to be discussed. It's something to be out in the open. Because especially from investors don't mind failure because they're investing in lessons learned that you don't have to learn again, right? So you've already learned those lessons. So Mitt, why don't you introduce our next topic?
Thanks, Craig. Okay, so let's go with to pivot or not, and when is it time to change? I think with COVID-19, a lot of startups have had an opportunity to really assess their business to see, hey, is what I'm doing really make sense? I think a number of you as well work with quite a bit of tech founders, and tech founders love just building their tech first, and we're focused on an area that they've previously been in or they find very interesting, and they really jump towards it. Unfortunately, sometimes, with trying to find product market fit, they might have a product, but it doesn't really fit that market per se. And they've got to look at where they can reapply the technologies. I know one of the companies that we're working with had completely taken a part of their technology and applied it elsewhere and changed in order for them to survive and keep going as a ongoing business. However, there's others similar to as we were talking about previously, where with the sense of failure happening, they sort of decide, hey, like, what do I do? Do we just shut down? Is it over? And typically people only make that decision pretty much when they're almost out of cash. Whereas as some of the items that Marcus was identifying, which is sort of like your performance targets and measures, like you should sort of be taking it, like, should you be looking at some of these criteria ahead of time and what should you be doing? Personally, I think it's something where, especially as a startup looks to find their product market fit, they should be discussing with quite a number of the other incumbents in this space as well, to sort of see, hey, is their solution really something that makes sense? Are they going to go after and fight for the same customer? Or is there sort of a product that's available within the same products that can actually be sold? So if it's sort of a complementary product to a solution that's being already offered by a leading provider and just selling directly to them as a channel partner. And I think this is something that people don't really think about. And I think it shouldn't require a pandemic for people to tune up their business.
Who wants to jump in on when to pivot?
I can jump in, Marcus, if you don't mind. Just I was so just to sort of piggyback off Mitt's point, the idea of like it shouldn't take a pandemic to take a look. I was reading the Lean Startup kind of excerpts from it in preparation for this, and what the author Eric Ries, I think is the pronunciation, or I can't remember.
Yes.
But, basically saying every few weeks, every startup should basically have a like pivot or persevere meeting every so often. He basically, I think the time frame he gave was every few weeks is too often, but every like quarter is not often enough. But he said every startup. So I thought that was kind of interesting about like sort of having a quarterly or maybe a little more often than quarterly check-in going, you know, is this original idea, this vision that we saw, is it happening? And are we actually, you know, are we executing on what we saw originally, or is it time for a change? That was just a kind of cool number, I thought. But again, coming at it from the emotional side, because that's my bent. Also, if the pivot is taking you away from what you really love about the business, that I feel like is a very good indicator that it's not right. If it's taking you into something that seems like a good moneymaker, but you hate it and you won't have any passion for all the hard work and the slog that it takes to make it happen, then what's the point, right? So the way I see it is that human psychology is such that no matter how good the idea is, if it's not for you and it's not really what's going to get you up and working, and even if it's going to make money, if it's not what you're truly passionate about and providing value to the people you want to provide value for is not part of the equation, it's just a good money maker, I don't think then that's the time to pivot. I think pivoting to something else, you know, with less obvious upside may be more interesting if the thing you're doing isn't working, or maybe, you know, just persevering and finding tweaks to it. You know, I guess I don't know what a pivot would be defined as, you know, tweaking the model or something, or tweaking the method of delivery. But I would say that if the pivot leads you away from what you truly love, it's not worth it, because you're not gonna execute, you're not gonna make it happen.
Marcus?
Well, I'm going to disagree right off the bat with Will's last statement. Let's get into it. Okay. I actually think you can pivot into something that you don't like. So for example, Will, let's say whatever I'm doing right now isn't working, and we'll get into those kind of discussions later, but I have an opportunity, even if it's just short term, survival mode, we'll call it, but it pays me $6,000 an hour. I hate the work, but I'm going to do it for the next 6 months. And even if it's soulless and sucks the life out of me, I am now in a position financially where I can volunteer my time and regain my soul, so to speak. So I think there has to be some perspective given, because what I see too often with startups and entrepreneurs is they're 100%, I love what I do. It doesn't matter if I can't pay my bills. I love what I'm like, no, it does matter. So what's the balance for you? Is it 20% stuff that I hate and 80% that I kind of enjoy? So I think that's a whole other conversation. But
yeah, I'd love to
put it out there. Go ahead.
I'd love to respond, unless Mitt has something that he wants to jump in with.
Go ahead.
No, I'll let you guys keep going.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And so, yes, I think if there is a sort of obvious path forward where you can build up some capital and some runway, breathing room, however you want to see it, and there's this obvious thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to take these corporate contracts, or I'm going to, you know, do whatever it is that you need to do to get through to that position. I think that is true, but I guess when I'm saying pivoting to something you have no passion with is another sort of entrepreneurial long shot. An idea of like, you know, so the entrepreneurial bet, I think, as some people call it, is like, I'm going to put a whole bunch of time and money into this, and it's not going to show returns quickly, but I think it's going to pay off in the long term. So I would say that if it's another entrepreneurial bet of like another 2 years, I think most people won't make 2 years. If it's 6 months, yeah, you can probably do it, but I think 2 years is too much.
Well, and that even came up. So to answer the question Mitt put forward, I mean, when we talk about pivoting, the business person in me has tons of data to support this next statement, is COVID revealed the cracks in government, in healthcare, and in business, especially small business. Now, businesses of all sizes are dying, but small business is the most vocal because we make up most of the business in Canada, looking for the same kind of bailouts that large business gets, et cetera, et cetera. And as cold as this sounds, I don't think business deserves it, because what it did is it showed us we did not have a sustainable business model. To your point about looking and internally and seeing how often are we going to pivot or close it, or I don't remember the exact word you used, but this whole process is something called business rhythm. And business rhythm is the foundation of everything that we teach to businesses of any size. And essentially, I'll give you a quick example. Let's say you're a product-based business, 15% tends to be the average net profit. Okay, so if you're doing a 15% margin, you're a decent business, and that means you have a 1-year business rhythm. So you've got your daily tasks, your weekly review, your monthly minor revisions, your quarterly major revisions, and your annual alignment. That's a standard business rhythm. So to your point, and to everything we've been talking about so far with data, and we're really going to get into data, but the story it tells with this rhythm is you can see based on where your net margin is along that rhythm about what you need to do. You're not going to change things too often because that can be dangerous as well. But let's say you're only doing 5% net margin. Well, suddenly that whole year condenses down to a quarter, right? So now it's an accelerated timeline to get the same amount done. And if you're actually at a negative margin, then that quarter goes down to a month. So at that point, almost every day equals a week. And the insanity behind that, people are like, how is that even possible? You can't make more hours. But when you study again, the data, it's amazing how much time is wasted by startups and small businesses. And when you apply this type of principle to basically an expanding and shrinking time dilation, I mean, that's how we did it. Someone had to smack me over the head as a mentor repeatedly and show me how much time I was wasting. And we ended up doing an entire year's worth of revenue in 12 weeks. It was ridiculous. And that put us on the right path to where we could expand again and now have a more sustainable approach to things. So I think as far as pivots go, it's really up to the willingness and the ethics that existed ahead of COVID. We took on over 252 pivot clients during COVID over the last 5 months. And out of those 252, 247 successfully pivoted. We took them all the way through within a 5-week period to where they would switch to that new idea, which they were all passionate about, help them with their marketing, help them with their research, get it out there, get all their campaigns going until they landed their first sale. That was the promise. So we helped a bunch of businesses. So is pivoting possible? Yes. Is it a pandemic? Does it matter? No, because we face challenges every day of varying skills. And it comes back to what we've talked about, that planning, that data, that ability to read the story and react accordingly. So I hope that answers your question there a bit, Nick.
Yeah, you took a couple of notes there. Did you want to respond, Will, or?
I mean, I think that was awesome and really interesting, and I like the sort of breaking it down in terms of your margins versus how much time you have. Yeah, and I think a tremendous amount of time is wasted. Certainly, I waste time every month, but I think. Yeah, I think you said it great. You said it very well. My only sort of clarification on what I was saying before would be pivoting from, like, let's say, making sweaters to making automated robots that would, like, let's say, violate your ethics somehow is more what I'm talking about. Like, if you're in a whole different industry or a whole different value proposition that takes from why you started and what you really want to do in the world versus, some new thing where you go like, yeah, if I join up with some spam clickbait marketing agency, I could maybe make a bunch of money, but it would kind of violate what it is that I want to do. So that's the kind of pivot I was talking about avoiding. That sort of like, yeah.
No, agreed. And the other interesting thing there is, though, your initial example, I was going to jump all over, but I'll do it in a friendly way. You went from making sweaters to making robots, but the common denominator was making. So if you ever do like sacred gift studying and seeing what our inherent gifts are at different phases in our life, that gift of craftsmanship, data again shows that someone would probably have been equally comfortable doing the sweaters and pivoting to the robots. It's still craftsmanship. But if they, let's say, and your second example was great, because let's say they went from making sweaters to performing live on stage. Those are two completely different types of gifts that might be dreadful for someone to make a transition to, even if it's guaranteed to pay more. So again,
I like that a lot.
Sacred gifts do play
sacred
a part.
Gifts.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, a non-COVID situation. I used to work with a company called Final Blueprint. And some of you might know Kevin Olds, who's in our community now. And Final Blueprint, Kevin created because he's very passionate. He had three situations where someone had died really close to him or very near death experience within a very short period of time. And he started thinking about, he wanted to solve, what happens when you pass away? What happens to your digital footprint? What happens to your iTunes account and your Amazon and all the digital stuff you bought? Where does it go? Who gets your passwords? All that kind of stuff. And he was really passionate about it. I interviewed it for my podcast. And one of the things that his customers kept asking him about was wills. When are you going to add wills as part of this? And he says, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. It's not really our mission. We're going to get to that. So long story short, do you know what that company's called now?
Final will?
Willfuls.
Willful.
Yeah, Willful. Aaron Burry and Kevin Olds, you see her all over. Yes, they pivot because customers kept asking for wills. And listen to your customer. If you're trying to sell something and your customers aren't buying, but they're like, hey, if you do this, I'll buy, then you really need to start thinking about that. And if you just look up Willful, and they're growing crazy now. So Marcus, we're moving a little slow, but I wanted to jump over to the next topic to you.
Okay, well, we've already been talking about it, so we'll be direct with it. So the first topic I brought up this evening is data doesn't lie. And then I was going to follow that with prove me wrong, and yet somehow we're all aligned to that. So data doesn't lie. Now, what I will point out, it's a note I take on earlier, and we're all agreeing about failure and everything else and how you can learn from the past mistakes based on the data. But here's the thing. You can't make that up in hindsight, right? So I'm going to switch the question a bit to the other panelists. What are your best practices for people listening and watching this later to proactively start tracking? What should they track at a bare minimum? And then when it comes back to me, I'll do the same thing, let you know my core best practices. But what are the best practices? What data should people at the very minimum be tracking when they start out?
Why don't we start with the CPA? Mitt, let's ask you, what data should we be tracking?
Yeah, awesome. I'll use a really simple example from our accounting practice that I will say most small accounting firms and medium-sized accounting firms don't do, is have a CRM system where you would think we would have it, right? Considering we handle a lot of personal information and use a lot of other client management tools. A typical CRM system isn't being used to track what's the top of your funnel, what does the conversion look like, what does that final sale look like, and then what does that sale evolution look like as time goes by. Unfortunately, we weren't doing that at first. But as we continued to work with the tech companies and things of that nature, it just became sort of obvious, why aren't we doing this? Because at the end of the day, if I were to say, look to exit my business or looked at acquiring others, I'd want to see how others are performing. And I can use comparables of, hey, this is what my conversion looks like. Can you show me yours? And a lot of them, for the most part, are going to say, oh, I have no idea. I haven't been tracking it. But that would be sort of the best way to do so, especially if you're going into an industry where other organizations are doing it. I know when other large organizations look towards M&A, they usually want to see this. They want to say, okay, cool. I know you guys are only at 100K in revenue or 200K in revenue, but what does your pipeline look like and what does the conversion rate look like? Because if I can bring over your solution to my whole client base, what is that conversion going to look like towards them, and how can I determine a value for you? So I think tracking that portion is very important. I also think time lock. I hate time locks. Okay, I'll say that as a thing. From professional services, having to bill your time, I hated it. But it's also a very good task to kind of have an understanding of where your staff are working and where you yourself are working. Are you working in the business or on the business? And that's something people tend to forget, especially with, and I'm just going to focus on tech here, with a tech founder focus. The tech founders, typically if they're tech savvy, let's say that, they will typically just want to build. They want to be the engineer. They want to be the programmer building their baby because that's what they know how to do. Well, guess what? You decided to be CEO, and CEO's job is not to necessarily build the product on a go-forward basis. You might build the MVP, but overall, your job now is to find all the people to do all the things you don't know how to do. And tracking that, even as it comes down to interviews, like, okay, what are the type of interview questions am I having? Am I databasing it? Am I comparing it? Engineers are really good at doing these kind of things, and as a CPA, working with a lot of engineers, I started to implement some of those tactics as well. So That's what I would use to measure it. Also, just looking at what other industry and organizations are using to track their performance metrics. What are they posting in their VC decks and things like that to compare their performance in that industry, whether it's traditional or in the tech space, and using those metrics as a basis to then provide updates to investors, potential investors, and customers, and all of that.
Will?
Yeah, I mean, Mitt covered a lot of really good stuff. And just as a simplification, because this acronym and system really helped me kind of take my measurement to the next level of a really important metric, which is, this comes from Dent Global Accelerator. They have some really good, they're able to break down this stuff really simply, and they talk about laps. So measuring leads, appointments, presentations, and sales. So if you kind of, and then if you know what the sale, costs, then you kind of go, okay, well, we get this many leads, and, from each of these leads, we get this percentage of conversions to to an appointment where, okay, this appointment is, let's say, a phone call, 15-minute phone call, maybe half an hour phone call to kind of suss out if this person is interested and is sort of a hot lead. Then there's a pitch or presentation, sort of more bigger sales conversation. And then eventually after that, there's the point of sale. And so measuring that and seeing your percentages shrinking, or your numbers kind of shrinking from each, you can get a really good sense of, okay, if we reverse engineer this, how many leads do we have to be getting a month in order to hit our revenue targets? And it's kind of a good way of working backwards and just get a sense of the cash flow. And then in terms of numbers that I've seen coming up, and what Mitt said about, checking to see what people in your industry are doing, through all my work in a lot of the tech incubators like DMZ and TechStars, the numbers that come up so much to me are customer acquisition cost and lifetime value, or CAC, which is a horrible way of saying that acronym, and LTV. So that number to me always seems to be included in the pitch decks. It seems that VCs really want to know that number, and that there's a good ratio there. The customer acquisition cost should be, I think it's like, should be over 5. The lifetime value to customer acquisition should be like over 5 is good, I think. But maybe Marcus or Mitt could come in there and tell me a more concrete number there. Yeah, a month-over-month growth rate seems to be very, and then if it's a subscription service, a resubscription rate. So how many people are resubscribing? Yeah, those are some metrics that I see come up a lot.
Yeah, and churn, how much are you losing?
Yeah, and churn.
Yeah. I love Mike over at Dent. He's a great guy. I like Laps. A couple of things I want to point out that are dangerous with that is, one, that whether it's Dent or anyone else that I find they forget is leads is great. And so many businesses of all sizes, again, they're always like leads, but they forget the most important one, existing follow-up. So much easier. Existing follow-up is so critical. And I agree with the rest. I call them different things. So we call them existing follow-up, new leads, money meetings, which is basically your presentation, sales. And if you're going to track these conversions and closing ratios, you must track your revenue. Have a target for the week, revenue target, even daily. And I'll tell you the reason why, Will. Let's say I have 2 presentations this week and I make 2 sales. That's 100% close ratio. I am now on top of the world. But if those 2 sales were worth $60, it's a fake number, which tied into something else we're going to talk about later. But it's a fake number because there's no volume behind it. So it's important to make sure that you track the revenue target, because it'll dictate the volume you need to do. Because now if I have to do 50 sales that week, if it's a product based, like a low-end product, and I only managed to sell like 10, then my ratio just changed dramatically for that week. So those numbers, it's important because they don't lie until they do. Something I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I agree with you, Mitt, 100%. When we start to work with, clients that are looking at exit strategy, the biggest key to M&A that we guarantee them is a 10 times valuation. Like, who doesn't want that, right? And the way we do it is we really don't change anything about what they're doing. We simply just start tracking it all for them. And you're right, it makes a company so attractive to VC. Like, it's unbelievable. That's what they want. Yeah, profitability is important, but to support that growth, they want to see how you did it and is it repeatable, right? Michael Gerber, love him, met the man. The whole in your business, on your business, I want to add my 2 cents to it, and I've told it to his face. Craig's heard this story many times. you will never get out of your business. It just doesn't happen. Even as the CEO, you know, the big deals, the important meetings, you will always be there. Having said that, I completely agree with you, especially tech startups. Getting them to even look at things like sales and marketing and hiring, you're right. They just want to build the system, not realizing that that's just bleeding money instead of making money. So I agree with the principle. I just had to point out the inherent conflict in the whole idea of the E-myth that Michael Gerber put forward. And to supplement that, the one thing that won't be part of the conversation right now, because Craig wants to move on, is when you're looking at industries, and I'm going to actually just put a link in the chat for everybody. This is KPI Mega Library. It's a free resource that has tens of thousands of KPIs across industries. So if you don't know where to get started, go take a look. Everything's there, from accounting and finance to project management to operations to human resources to everything we've talked about. Having said that, the things that aren't there, that again, many companies miss, is leading versus lagging KPIs. Everything we've been talking about is the easy stuff. How many leads did I make? How many sales did I make? Fantastic. But let me ask you this, guys. Why did I make the sale? What worked? Which close worked? What approach worked? This is the kind of stuff you have to track. How did it make our salespeople feel? Did they feel, to Will's point earlier, did they feel on passion, on core value, right? Did they feel they were utilizing their sacred gifts, or did it make them feel slimy and dirty, but you know, we got the sale? So understanding that, those subtle things and how it affects your overall work culture is, again, something a lot of companies miss. So make sure you're tracking the leading and the lagging KPIs.
Yeah, I agree with that component quite a bit, especially I've worked with some organizations where the CEO was doing all the sales originally. They got some money raised and then they started hiring staff. And then, you know, their expectations of where their projections were going were based on their performance when they were the salesperson. And obviously you have, as a CEO, you have a way better understanding of where things are at and a lot more passionate than some of your sales force. And they didn't hit, they actually went down in sales in comparison after they hired all these people, which was insane because the CEO stepped away saying, hey, I don't have to do this anymore. That's not my job. I'm going to go focus on other things. And like you said, if they had tracked and understood why the reasons of sales for the CEO were working and then why it didn't work with the regular staff, they could have been able to bridge that gap. But unfortunately, they didn't.
And just to jump in, Mitt, I think also if the CEO, I don't know the story, but it sounds like they didn't also commit to a thorough training of the sales staff to say this is what works for me when I was selling. It didn't seem like there was a bridge between, okay, this is how to sell based on what I'm doing, although I don't know if that's true.
I think part of it also comes down to when you're successful at a sale, you remember that quite a bit, and it's about documenting your failures as well, or, hey, what didn't work? We use a CRM system where we comment on as to why something didn't work. And I actually like reviewing it because that's what's going to help me. If I keep telling myself, great job, man, you keep closing and you're doing this, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy that way. But I want to know why it didn't work for certain customers. And using the CRM system, or even like a board like Trello where you can put customers in and put comments, I really enjoy doing that.
And I'm going to put one more thing, which is sort of like mixing qualitative and quantitative data, which is if you look at your sales team or yourself, your performance, if you record it on video and then watch it back, you get a lot of qualitative data about what your facial expressions are like, what your body language is, how your voice is communicating, the emphasis that you're putting on words, the clarity with which you are speaking. And a lot of people neglect this because it's sort of, it doesn't seem to be key performance indicators, but it's really, really huge in terms of how you're speaking with your customers. Of course, I have a bias because this is what I do, but it's a really, really great thing that everybody can do now is just take a video and watch it back, watch your sales performance during these conversations.
I agree with you, Will. I hate reviewing video of myself though. I've done it. I do it because it is the way to do it, but yeah.
Yeah. And I agree too, especially right now with a lot of things moving to remote. Yay. It's so easy even to record stuff like this and see how you are later. Are you paying attention? Do you have nervous twitches? Which I get. Now, not everyone has that opportunity as they're doing their sales and what have you. So to supplement that, if you want to take it a step back, one of the greatest tools I ever bought for many reasons, including what you're talking about, was I bought a USB pen. of all things. And all you do is when you click the top of it, it starts recording. So I would just have that in my shirt. And as soon as I was about to do my thing, click the pen, do my thing, listen to it after, heard myself going, about 1,000 times a minute, and then corrected that. You probably don't hear me do that much anymore. So even just recording yourself on an audio level, not as effective as video, of course, Will, I know, and you're really good at what you do. I just didn't, even having something to measure yourself in that way is critically important. And Craig, I was just going to say to you, I think next time, here's our lesson learned already. Just pick one question. We'll talk for an hour.
4 topics. Yeah, I thought about that coming into this. I wasn't sure, but I wanted to add a couple. I believe in rapid and always experimenting. So you should be measuring everything. If you're doing something, why are you doing it? What is the expected response? How much effort are you going to put into it? How many people are you going to talk to? What is the expected outcome? And looking back at it after. So all of these things. For example, I was talking, there's a new opportunity. I'm working with somebody going after this market. And I said, all right, let's track down 50 clients. Let's send out a proposal over the next week. See how many respond. I want, out of 50, I want 5 people to respond to follow-up meetings, and I want 2 people to close a deal, which gives us 4% conversion rate and a 2-week lead time on a sales cycle. Something to measure. Now we can close that, we can change that, but here we are just guessing. I don't know if anybody even wants this thing, but let's measure this and see what happens, because now I can start extrapolating and I can go to Will and say, gee, my cost per acquisition is this, because I know exactly where to get my list, how much to do, and I'm already just at the experiment. I'm just at the basic idea stage. I don't know what if anybody wants this, but by doing that, you're always validating what you're doing. And if you're going out and pitching or doing sales, here's a tip: bring someone with you, just to take notes, just to watch you. I do when you're doing experimentation and you're talking to customers. I have this log. You're supposed to write down, what they say, what their observations were. Blah, blah, blah. So have someone do that about you, while you're doing it, because you're in selling and you can't be thinking about how they're responding and, gee, let me write down that word they just said. You need to be selling your thing. So if you can, bring someone along just to take notes on you.
Agreed. And in regards to experimentation, and again, let's tie it all together back to passion and everything that Will talked about, it becomes fun. When you stop looking at failure as a bad thing, see, we've gone full circle, experimenting and testing new things, going in eyes wide open, and it doesn't work out, you're like, I understand why. And that's a great feeling, because then it allows you to tweak and experiment some more until you start seeing the results you want. So have fun with it. That's the point, right?
Agreed. So, Will, you get to pick the last topic today.
Oh, wow. I totally forgot that I had submitted some because I was so invested in all these ones. So let's go. I kind of want to change my question
That's fine.
as well.
Go.
Originally, I had said emotional intelligence for entrepreneurs, strength or weakness. I want to change that to just emotions for entrepreneurs. So because obviously intelligence sounds like an inherently good thing. What I meant to get at was, logic versus emotion. It's very often a binary that's expressed in many different ways, like head versus heart, or mind versus body, or analytical versus experiential, or all these kind of dichotomies, yin versus yang, and in lots of other cultures they have this as well. But what is I guess how much is too much? What do you guys think about, the role that your emotions play, and how much you feel like you should keep your emotions in check when making business decisions? And how much do you say, well, we are an emotional species, so I have to kind of keep that open in order to connect with my customers and understand human behavior? I guess I just want to know what you guys think about all that.
Man. Who wants to start? Yeah.
Oh, I do, totally.
Yeah.
So you set me up so much for this, Will. I love it. So we actually, by we I mean I actually copyrighted a phrase. It's called emotional investment. And I prefer it over the common phrase of emotional intelligence, which I believe is important. But emotional investment is something you want your entire team to be working towards. For to what we've been talking about, even with CEO sales, you want to develop a culture and a system, back to Michael Gerber, on how to actually create emotional investment where your team is invested with their hearts and their passions in your business as you are. So that's a really wonderful thing. It also ties back emotions wise. Something you said earlier, I didn't know if it would come up, but it did, is you talked about how what's too much, what's not too much. You know, you might not want to be transparent and share that the reason your business fails because you were drunk all the time. I've actually made some of my best connections by being completely transparent in all things. And a quick example of that was last Christmas at Startup Drinks. I'd forgotten, I guess, that I was going to be doing a pitch, so I was drinking a bit heavily. And by the time it was my turn to speak, I don't know if you remember this, Craig, but I got up there. I know I was staggering. I was doing my best to be walk a straight line. And I got up there and I looked around and I was like, well, I'm drunk. And then I did a pitch and it was absolutely hysterical and people laughed and it like broke the ice so well. And I did some good business that evening. Some of it I ended up, and if you're watching this, I apologize, but I couldn't remember everything that had happened. So I actually did not follow up, which I'm very much known for following up. So I apologize if you're one of the people I never followed up with that night. Blame Startup Drinks. No. Blame my own responsibility. It also goes back to this discussion about the potentium, right? You talk about yin versus yang, light versus dark, all of this stuff. Science, again, love science, that phrase. It used to be that we have, well, we still do, all these billions of neurons for making decisions in our brain. And scientists have recently discovered that we also have those same type of neurons in our stomach. But I think it's something like 2 billion. If I don't know the exact numbers, but I know the ratio. So if it's like 2 billion of these decision-making neurons in our brain, they've discovered our stomach has 2 million of those types of things. The difference is the brain has the filter of our past experiences behind it, whereas the stomach doesn't. So that phrase we've always known about trust your gut is actually true. And then they've discovered even more recently, as they've been exploring this, that those same neurons also exist in the heart. So yeah, they're both equally important. In fact, some people would argue scientifically that it's even more important to trust the heart and gut because it's unfiltered by your previous bias.
So I was going to say, does that mean that therefore the stomach, it has none of the heuristics and biases that the brain has? So for example, when we look at a piece of, like with pattern seeking bias or confirmation bias, that the brain has, does that mean that the gut and heart actually don't have any of those things in place?
Correct. Because they're not wired the same way. Now, to be fair, they also have gas and your brain doesn't, right? So you got to be able to really listen to it. And it goes back, what I liked about this scientific study is and it sounds like both of you guys have, all of us have, if you've ever been a spiritual explorer, if you've ever looked at the non-tangible side of things, a lot of people talk about finding that stillness, that moment where you can hear truth. And whether that truth for you is external, internal, that's not what I want to talk about. But the truth is that even in our gut, we know what that truth is, and then the brain takes over and tries to convince us otherwise, right? So I think there has to be that head and heart cohesion, is what my mentor calls it, Colin Sprake. It has to have a cohesion to it in order for it to be a decision that you can fully walk into with confidence. So that's my whole take on how important are these things. I believe they're equally important, if not more so, to listen to your gut.
Mitt, what do
that's
you
amazing.
think?
I was just going to ask Mitt, how do you feel, especially someone coming from such a numbers data-based kind of profession and background?
You know what's funny? I'm very numbers oriented, but I can also get emotionally invested. And I would say I do get emotionally invested, but I also am an emotional person. I'm human, right? Even though most people sometimes are like, oh, no, I set my emotions aside. It's like, no, like your emotions still affect you. I think one of the difficulties, or I think one of the more positive things nowadays, is that there's a lot more meetups, a lot more groups and organizations where other entrepreneurs and startups are able to connect with one another. I think a lot of CEOs or those in the executive role still find it maybe a little difficult to maybe share some of the turmoil they go through. So I think the more some of the startup founders talk about what they're going through, it's sort of like, oh, that makes so much sense. I don't feel like I'm going down this dark hole and I feel like I'm a failure. All these things are crazy things that are happening. I have so much what's happening, blah, blah, blah. But because once you start talking to other people, they're like, yeah, I'm going through the exact same thing. And you're like, okay, cool. We're in this together. So I think talking about emotions is important, letting it also be a factor. So what I actually do is I started creating a framework for myself. where I reflected on all my past business decisions and investments and sort of like why I did it. And so there was a couple of components I looked at. The financial reward, which is probably the more logical side of things, but also sort of what like the social value reward was, like why I personally wanted to do it, or what I thought was interesting about it. And then the way it made me feel, or like what sort of impact I had from there. So I use those three criteria, and obviously this is like my own way of going about it. And I'm sure someone's written a book to utilize all of this as well. But I utilize these factors to review and see, hey, how does this make me feel? And is this going to make me make my right decision? Like this can be the most financially rewarding thing, but if I absolutely hate myself emotionally, then I don't think I'm able to do it. But again, it's all relative to where the things lie. And especially as the startup founders who watch this, they'll be presented with multiple opportunities where emotionally they might feel like an idea is a lot better to go down with, because it might appeal more to them from a technology standpoint or the technology enthusiast in them. But that's when they have to compare that to how viable is that as a business, and then connect that emotion to the data that Marcus was mentioning as well to make that decision. I don't think it comes back to it's both, right? It's not one or the other. It's always a combination of things. And I always say, like, it's always good to have, a good set of advisors on your team that you can also talk to. So myself and a few entrepreneurs are actually part of this group that we call the fellowship, in a sense, where we actually meet up and we just talk once a month. And we literally talk about, hey, provide an update to the group of like where you're at in regards to your different businesses or your business. Let's talk about one thing that was positive and what you did for it to be positive, and then one thing that's negative or you're working on / want the group's feedback on. I found it a great forum to where you can share both your financial components and your emotional side, or logic and emotion. And then you have independent third parties just being like, they're not in looking with any ill intent towards you. They're just like, you're totally missing this, or you should be doing this. It's like you're acting too hasty here. Like, let's look at it from this point of view. And I think it's been great for all of us within that group. So I think it's important to find others like that in your own network as well as you pursue other opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really important to have your own support network. And, it's kind of why I built Startup Toronto, now TorontoStarts, in the first place is, entrepreneurs need a community to gather. I don't like the word safe space because I think entrepreneurs need to be challenged and pushed and felt uncomfortable. So, but, but as an entrepreneur, it's a safe place to express your ideas. And yes, you'll be pushed around, but everyone is okay with your idea, and they're going to challenge and push you a little bit. But and we used to you came out to a couple of Friday founder drinks I was doing, and trying to get exactly just a little bit more connection, but it wasn't formalized to talk about some of the problems we were having, but it was just outside of the normal type of things. And getting back to the topic about emotion, I think there's a lot, if you can harness it for good, then when it's going to affect you negatively, try and get it under control and release it another way. Like, a lot of people stand on the stage and when they're pitching, they don't want to show emotion. And I was reminded just today about, Steve Ballmer back in the 90s. Developers, screaming and jumping around on stage and sweating and yelling and all super emotional. Everyone's super pumped. So there's definitely a place for emotion and pitching and presenting and in your company and inspirational. But yeah, you need to take a step back sometimes. And when they're long-term business decisions, you don't want to make them necessarily right then when you're in the heat of the moment. You want to take them and consider them and come back, because there's all sorts of other things. Like, if you're either negatively emotionally charged or positively emotionally charged, you could easily be swayed in either direction.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, is that, emotions are not inherently good or bad. They come from our evolutionary advancement, where they helped us to get out of certain intense situations and help us navigate the dangers of the world around us. But our evolution, what we are evolutionarily designed for and how we are living these days, are not aligned anymore. And so there can be a huge dissonance between what our emotions are actually trying to make us do versus what we actually need to do. And just I should take this opportunity, or I want to take this opportunity just to push therapy, which I always push on people. And I know it's not for everyone, or at least some people feel it's not what they need. And I know it can be like cost prohibitive for some people to find a good therapist or to find someone you connect with. But for me, and just, I think it's important just as a life thing, but the ROI I feel like on my business has also been huge because I'm so much more able to recognize my emotional patterns and reactions so that I'm less of a slave to them, just kind of going, I'm angry and I don't know why. So it must be about something real, or, all this kind of stuff. And going through therapy and working on all the exercises allows me to really understand what's actually going on emotionally. And then I feel like I make way better decisions, from going through that. So I push that on everybody I can, but especially entrepreneurs, is know yourself, know your own emotions, and, go to a goddamn therapist.
Agreed. And a little tip I want to give on there too, like I agree with you 100% on that. That's not what my tip is. I think what a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize, and Will, this is right up your wheelhouse, is when you are in front of an audience, when you are on stage, when you are pitching, when you are performing, whatever it is, so many entrepreneurs don't realize that, one, no one sees their fear, but two, the higher energy always wins. So if you get up there and you bring out that developers, it's going to charge the entire room and come back at you 100 times over. But when you go up there and you're awkward or frustrated, or your mic's not working and you're angry, that's also going to come back at you 100 times over. So you get to control the energy, provided you're the highest energy in the room. So always be the highest energy in the room.
Yeah, I always say to my clients, as the speaker, you are 100% responsible for the energy in the room. And that goes doubly for the virtual world, as I said, because there's no energy in the room. The virtual room is made up of people sitting on their couch, or, like they've got a beer resting on their lap or something. They're ready to go and, get their evening drink on. So you have to be even more in tune with your emotions. And that's that's a lot of work to dig in and go, what does this part mean of my pitch? And what does this part of what I'm saying mean? And how can I dig in more emotionally? And I find that tech founders are way too often not emotional enough. So I always push emotions, at least, especially in the speaking and the delivery of the business story, try to get way more in touch with your emotions because, yeah, as you say, it leads to better results.
Yeah, no, I love that.
And we got one more question from the chat room if we got a second. And I had a little online Twitter discussion with Michelle Romanoff about this actually the last couple of days. What are the main reasons for startup failure? They've got a list here: lack of market research, lack of funds, weak product, lack of data, or over projections. And I just want, basically, what do you think the number one reason for startup failure is, Mitt?
I'm glad you put me on the spot. The number one reason for failure?
Is it capital?
You can push through a lot of failure with capital, yeah, for sure. Because you can just hire a bunch of people to address all the things that you don't want to do. But ultimately, it comes down to having a lack of self-reflection and not having that data that we've been talking about today. If you keep saying, hey, look, everything around me I keep doing, and you know what, I'm awesome, I'm the awesomest, and things should be going great. But why isn't my sales working? Let me just keep hitting my head against the wall and just keep going. And you know what, this is going to suddenly work. Obviously, it's not working, and you weren't able to reflect on your own behavior to thrive from a sales perspective. But similarly, from a product perspective, like you've got to also take a look and realize, hey, maybe there's a competitor who's got a better solution out there, and you need more capital. Is there something else that you can do? It's all, and all of these things that I'm probably going to say would all come down to the ability to self-reflect. If you can't self-reflect on yourself, the business, the others on your team, it's going to ultimately lead to your failure. And even when it comes down to capital, one of the biggest things that I would say was my fault previously as well is I never really utilized a CRM system originally for tracking VCs. I use a system to track them from a list perspective, but I wasn't doing the, hey, you're an existing person who said they was interested, let me hit you with an additional follow-up, and doing that consistently. And honestly, I would say this time I've started with the top of the funnel with over 3,000 VCs, and now we're going down. Versus going and looking up the, hey, let me find the top 20 VC firms who are literally looking at the space and let me hit them up and, go down a handful of them, which, works with Canada, but, now with us being all remote, it can work across the board. And so having the ability to self-reflect, except sometimes that, you might not know it all, is really, Socrates, was it? It's like, I know nothing, right? No? The
I'm
only
not
thing I
sure.
know is that I know nothing, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I took that away from my university philosophy class at the time, and I think I've come to accept it as a line of business. There's going to be a lot of things you don't know, and you've got to reflect in order to realize that. And if you don't, that'll fail. I think one of the comments in here is I think lack of capo is a failure of them. Uh, you know what? I've worked with both like startups and publicly traded companies. People have projections all the time. Obviously, in early stage, you don't want to like grossly overpromise and underdeliver, but that same kind of thing happens in publicly traded companies as well. And honestly, a lot of the reason why some of them who are successful and or who are currently successful and then end up not being successful is because they stop self-reflecting and saying, hey, you know what? I've already got all the systems in place. I'm the market leader. I don't need to do anything. I'm going to stay as is. And that's when the competitor comes in and takes you out. So.
Yeah, early stage projections are always wrong. So why do you think startups fail, Marcus?
So I'm going to put my top 5. This is what we teach, but it's exactly what Mitt said. I'm going to sum it up in one word: leadership. That self-reflection, evaluating how others are doing, knowing where the capital's at, like all of it comes down to leadership. These other things are great too, supplementary. I'm not going to go through them all, but it's leadership. Without leadership, you are doomed to failure, period.
Will?
Yeah, I was going to say founders and teams. Like the product can change, as Mitt's talking about with self-reflection. If you have a weak product, you can pivot. You can see what's working, what's not. If you have that, but if you have a good team of people in place who won't let ego get in the way and say, well, this is the way I want to do it, and screw you guys, or screw the market. If the market doesn't get it, then they're just idiots. You're not Kurt Cobain. It's not up to you to just create something, and then if people don't get it, that they're just idiots, and I'll be appreciated when I die. You're not an artist, essentially. You are a business person, and there is a difference there when, I think artists' job, if they're any good, is to make something that is as true to themselves as possible. And then if fans buy it, great. And if they don't, it doesn't matter, because the point is creating the art from as authentic a place as possible. But in business, you should listen to what the audience wants, and you should kind of, I guess, quote unquote, sell out a little bit in order to make sure. But yeah, having the ego to be able to do that. And Craig, you and I have talked about this a lot. Removing ego from the equation and being able to be humble and say when you're wrong or say when something's not working, and keep checking in and listen to ideas from other people. Yeah. So I would say founders and teams. Yeah.
Yeah. So my response to Michelle was the number one reasons startups fail is they don't know their customer and they don't really know what they're selling. And after that, it's capital. It's just how it is. So, any last thoughts from you before we hang up, Mitt? How can people get a hold of you, find out more if they want to?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Mitchell Parampanigam. Otherwise, you can find me on Instagram at MittCPA, and shoot me a DM or follow. We post content there all the time.
Fantastic. Marcus?
So I'm going to make an offer here. So you can reach me at howtoproject.ca, and you can scroll down to the bottom, and there's a CEO coffee chat link. So feel free just to reach out. We can talk about whatever you want. I want to have some fun and experiment. So if you're watching this, doesn't matter when you see it, if you reach out to me, there will be no charge. There will be no upsell. There will be no nothing except practical, tactical help for you, from us, my team and myself, to help you solve one specific business challenge you're facing. So if you bring us a specific business challenge, I want to demonstrate to you how we work through all the stuff we're talking about today. Again, no hooks, no email follow-ups, none of that stuff we talked about. I'm doing it simply because we're in a position where we can serve you. So that's just what I want to leave with people today.
Perfect. We've already had a request for your contact info in the chat room, Marcus. What about you, Will?
So I'm going to put my Calendly link in there. I'm also doing something similar to Marcus, although I can't promise that I won't pitch you anything. But I'm starting a new program, so I am going to ask you, if you do get in touch with me, if you're interested in the kind of program that I'm running. But this is also a free strategy session. So I've been providing this since the outbreak happened, which is basically any founder who's having communication issues, content creation issues, especially in the video space. Like, I'm trying to help people put their thoughts on video, get their message out there, start becoming more comfortable on camera, on webinars, all that kind of thing. And you can book a call with me, and it's totally free, and I'll listen to your pitch and I'll give you feedback. So that's my Calendly link is there. And you can also follow me at Will Greenblatt on Instagram. Yeah, that's my spiel.
Thank you. You can follow all our future events at TorontoStarts.com. If you want to look just at events, it's TorontoStarts.com/events. Thanks everyone for attending, and thanks everyone for participating today. I appreciate it. And especially on a Wednesday night. The week is blurred together already. Wow. Thanks everyone. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.